Welcome, everyone, to the Northwest China Council's China Business Network presentation, A Tale of Two Port Cities. I'm David Cole, board member of the China Council, past president, and very happy to have with us this evening our two panelists, Michael Fowler, who's the managing director of the World Trade Center in Tacoma, and Michael Richards, the break bulk manager for the Port of Portland. We have a presentation by each of these gentlemen, and it'll be followed by a Q&A session, which I'll be moderating. For context, I'm the global trade lead for the Oregon Small Business Development Center's Global Trade Center here in Portland. Provides no-cost global trade advising for small businesses in support of the 20 small business development centers around the state. So we'll begin with the presentations. And then it'll be followed by the Q&A session. Please do use the Q&A function in Zoom. And as questions come up during the presentations, you can type those in, and at the appropriate time, we'll address those questions and get them answered, and hopefully have a lively discussion around those. So to start, we're going to start with Mike Fowler. Mike is the managing director, and he's a senior trade consultant at the World Trade Center in Tacoma. He's has rich experience in East Asia, and is currently working on some very interesting projects up in Tacoma. So if we can start with, we will start there. Michael? Okay, well, perhaps we're having a technical issue here. So we can switch over to Michael Richards to begin. John, if we can switch this over to Michael Richards, that would be great.
Thank you, David. Okay, thanks very much, David. And I really appreciate the invite to speak on behalf of Port of Portland. You know, although I'm not a container person per se, containers have possibly been the most volatile component of the ocean shipping industry over the past 3 years. So I'd really like to start by talking about changes at the Port of Portland since the start of the pandemic. You know, to give some background, in January of 2022, the Port of Portland, I'm sorry, in January of 2022, the Port of Portland's Terminal 6 had 12 vessel calls compared to January of 2021, when the terminal had only 4 vessel calls. And in 2019, start of the pandemic, Portland's Terminal 6 had only 12 vessel calls for the entire year. So as you can see, and as I'll talk about a bit, the pandemic and the supply chain situation, the shipping congestion has really proved to be a real boom for Port of Portland. Okay, so less than a year after the start of the pandemic, Port of Portland welcomed its first regular weekly liner service since the departure of Hanjin in February of 2015. During that period, there was no regular container service. And this really started to, you know, this drew on for quite some time. So the following year, the very following year, Port of Portland welcomed Mediterranean Shipping Company, the world's largest container carrier, also with a weekly service at Terminal 6. 2022 also brought a surge of break bulk cargoes in the form of heavy equipment, wind energy components, and transformers weighing as much as 250,000 metric tons. You know, by now, we're all quite aware of the massive ship congestion, particularly through, though they're not exclusively, the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. This congestion has brought extensive growth in our container business, Port of Portland. Specifically, The diversion of 53-foot containers from the Port of Los Angeles to the Port of Portland. These 53-foot containers are the ones you commonly see on the highways, transporting goods for companies like Walmart and Amazon. They come in and they maintain their service throughout, domestically through the roads here. Again, for the very first time, the Port of Portland now has a weekly service of importing these 53-foot containers. Again, something that had never happened before. Although these containers come in on a charter basis, this business is expected to last for the long term. We've also seen the expansion of imports of our standard 40-foot containers. This is, again, in addition to the regular weekly services from Mediterranean Shipping Company and SM Lines. These are coming in on chartered vessels, but again, just like the 43-foot containers, we expect to see this business remain for an indefinite period of time. SM Lines, which is also very interesting, has begun importing what we call IPI cargo. This is cargo that's not coming into the region as we've historically received, but it comes into Portland, goes to Chicago, and it goes out for nationwide distribution. Again, this was really the bread and butter of the Port of Long Beach, or I'm sorry, the Port of Los Angeles, which and now has shifted this because it's just it's just not it's untimely for these mass distributors to come through these traditional this traditional supply chain and these traditional ports. We do see some congestion easing in Southern California in the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. As of last Wednesday, there were 50 container ships waiting at anchor. And this is less than half of the all-time high of 109 containers back in January. It's the lowest level we've seen since September. This is likely the result of lower seasonal exports around the Lunar New Year holiday, which may have allowed terminals to clear some of the backlog. It could also be the result of congestion shifting to other terminals, such as Vancouver, British Columbia, and other places along the East Coast. Historically, February and March tend to be the slower months of the year for container volumes, with the Lunar New Year factories in China typically shutting down for 15 to 16 days between late January and mid-February. So this really, I really wanted to talk, really answer as many questions as possible about this. But I think really to sum it up, we're seeing just a boom in Portland. Some of it has been as a result of us moving a lot of, putting a lot of work into bringing the container business and other business back into our port. But a lot of it is directly related to the congestion issue, the pandemic, the increase in consumer consumption that just cannot be supported by, again, Long Beach and Los Angeles. And so I'd like to leave it at that as a start, really tee off to Michael, and then leave some chance, chance for some questions and answers here.
Well, thank you, Michael. Appreciate the comments. Look forward to the discussion afterwards. I'm sure we'll have some interesting questions for you. And I just want to add in, we missed the bio for Michael. He's the break bulk manager for the Port of Portland. He's also the vice president of the Portland Suzhou Sister City Association. So appreciate his time here. Next, we'll turn it over to Mike Fowler. Again, is the managing director of the World Trade Center in Tacoma. Michael?
Sorry about that. Let's try it again. Let's try this. Hopefully it'll work. Can you see my slide?
Yes, thank you.
All right. All right, very good. Well, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Today, first of all, I'd like to thank the Port of Tacoma. They're our primary supporters, and they allow me to do what I do. And that's the first question. What do I do, and what does the World Trade Center do? So very quickly, the World Trade Center is a 50-year-old organization, the parent company of all World Trade Centers, and we have each has a license. Ours is owned by the Port of Tacoma, and it's said to be the largest global business network. There are over 300 of them, and our slogan is prosperity through trade. These are some of the iconic buildings the World Trade Center has. I know you have one in Portland, a nice building on the water. And there's two types of generally two types. One is the building management business model, and that's like yours down in Portland, I believe. Seattle has the same, and the World Trade Center Tacoma is like about 90 other World Trade Centers around the world, it specializes in business services. And so that's what we do. We assist small and medium-sized companies accessing international markets. These are our four primary things we do. We do consulting, we do educational services, we do cross-border e-commerce and trade missions. Now, let's talk about the sister city relationship with Fuzhou and how it's benefited our small and medium-sized enterprises. In order to do so, we have to go back about 150 years. Back in 1885, the Northern Pacific Railway was complete, and with Tacoma as its terminus. And having completed the railroad, the Chinese population in Tacoma was horrifically expelled. And this happened in many cities around the US, but Tacoma's expulsion was particularly notorious. And when relations with the People's Republic of China were formalized in 1979, our region became the first to connect with trade. In fact, the first ship coming from the People's Republic of China docked in Seattle, and that same year, Deng Xiaoping came in to visit. That was the same year that I went to China as well as a cadet, which was kind of a life-changing trip. In 1982, a Dr. and Mrs. David Murdoch moved to Tacoma, and they noticed something was missing, a Chinatown. And after looking into it, they found out about the eviction, and they wanted to bring it to public awareness. They helped erect a monument, and ultimately several leaders got together and began a process of reconciliation. So you can see in the slide, three of these leaders. In the center of the upper left slide is Teresa Pan Hosley. She runs the China Reconciliation Park Foundation. Her husband's to the left, and another very important individual in this was Li Wang, I think. And anyways, these folks and many others got together and for years have worked on this park. You can see in the middle slide, there's a plaque explaining the expulsion. And on the lower right is a picture of the Fuzhou Ting, which was donated by Fuzhou to the city of Tacoma. And it's become a real cultural feature of Tacoma. Every year we have our Mid-Autumn Festival there, well, just about every year. And we also have, people have weddings there. It's quite a nice place. You can ask Jim Mockford about it. He went there last week, I know. During the same year that the Park Foundation was established, which was 1994, Tacoma established its sister city relationship with Fuzhou. And here is my predecessor at the World Trade Center, the executive director of the World Trade Center, who had the authority at the time to sign the sister city establishment agreement. She later became, for many years, the Port of Tacoma commissioner. And she is looking and speaking with Fuzhou Party Secretary Xi Jinping who became the president of China, as you may know. This relationship that they established really flourished. And we have 13 other relationships in Tacoma, which is quite a bit for a small city like ours. And many of them are flourishing. So we've had so many cultural and educational events, you know, dragon boats and dragon boat races, educational exchanges, all kinds of you take another event to explain them, and it'd be better having our Tacoma Sister Cities Chair, Claire Petridge, or our Sister Cities Coordinator and Project Manager, Debbie Bingham, explain all the aspects of our Sister City program. I will stick to explaining the Tacoma Fuzhou Trade Project, which has developed into what we call today the International Trade and Investment Program, which is housed at the World Trade Center Tacoma. So the Tacoma Fuzhou Trade Project was established on April 18th of 2008. It was initiated by Connie Bacon, the then Port Commissioner, and a gentleman named Li Hong, who was the Director General of the Fuzhou Foreign Affairs Office. And it was the city and the Port of Tacoma, especially the city's Community and Economic Development Assistant Director, Martha Anderson, and the port's Tong Zhu, who is now the Chief Commercial and Strategy Officer of the Northwest Seaport Alliance, who really took the reins of this project, which I helped to manage. And the way that it worked was it was an 18-month pilot project. And we sent one representative to Fuzhou, where they had an office for him. And Fuzhou sent 3 representatives in succession to Tacoma for 6 months each. And we had an office at the Port of Tacoma. And we had a goal of conducting $800,000 in transactions. And there was a formula: a certain amount needed to be export, and a certain amount could be import, a certain amount trade investment, foreign direct investment. But we ultimately, we reached it. We were very within a few thousand dollars, but the Great Recession happened in October of that year, in 2008, and we needed to consolidate the program, and we moved it to the World Trade Center Tacoma upon its completion. And this photo was taken when Connie Bacon visited the Fuzhou Party secretary in 2015. The gentleman holding the microphone is our deputy mayor, Joe Lonergan. And the party secretary kindly gathered some of the retired city leaders who were there at the signing of the Sister City Agreement back in 1994. And I remember eavesdropping and hearing how they were happily discussing past dragon boats and the incredible happenings that they had experienced over decades. I think all of them were paddlers at one point, except for the secretary. So we often attended the Cross Straits Trade Fair, which they have every May 18th and to the 23rd. And in this particular trade fair, I brought heritage brown sugar bourbon to some whiskey sellers there. And I remember very specifically when we took this photo, they said, "一路一带." And I wondered, what's that? What's that about? And it turns out, just I think the week before it started the 2017 Belt and Road Forum. So they said one road, one belt, and it was very memorable. The photo to the right is a booth that the gentleman that we sent to Fuzhou for 18 months, he continued in trade, and he was running this America pavilion. It's a very busy event, and I think we ended up having quite an impact ultimately on trade. This gentleman is still doing business. And this was fun. This was speed trading. It was kind of like speed dating. We had several vendors having their own little tables, and when the bell rang, everybody had to switch to the next table. And so our folks were busy writing down names and getting information. And when the bell rang, everybody scrambled to the next table. And it became very interesting because most of our vendors were selling wine and whiskey and all kinds of alcoholic beverages. So it became very lively. But ultimately, the gentleman there, and the gentleman on the left, he ended up selling a couple pallets of wine to China. And this, I put this slide in there because, I think some of you know more about it than I do, but I remember visiting a neighborhood that you could swear you were in some suburban neighborhood in the US, but it was in Suzhou. And I think it was named something like Little Portland. I'd be curious to hear if you know about that. But this, the gentleman who was doing this was telling us that so many Chinese students are coming back, and some people have lived in the US are coming back to China, and there's no doubt that they want to live like they did in the US with these houses that were built by 2x4 construction and the like. And we often went to China. We haven't gone in a couple of years, but we often went to China, and they often came and to visit us. And we miss not having them, but they will come again, I expect. This was a delegation that came in, and 3 wine buyers were introduced to 3 sellers, I remember. And so this kind of activity continues. Even despite the pandemic, it continues. We had the Fuzhou Foreign Affairs Office came over a few years ago, and I believe it was they who initiated the idea that we would form a joint committee. And ultimately we did, and it was the city of Tacoma, the Tacoma sister cities, and the mayor, the port commissioners, and the World Trade Center and others joined in this joint committee. And we did it virtually in September of, I believe it was 2020. And we were asked to bring proposals to the meeting. And I brought the proposal of, let's do virtual trade missions, since we can't do in-person trade missions anymore. And so we did. And our first virtual trade mission was this past November. And this photo was taken from an article in the Chinese press, and it's what it looked like from the Chinese side. The gentleman at the head of the table runs the pilot free trade zone in Fuzhou. And this was the organization that we did that partnered with us. They brought some cross-border e-commerce importers and food trading companies, and we brought chocolate and nuts, coffee, gourmet honey, whiskey, dessert liquor, and beer. We made some really nice connections, especially one with one of their top cross-border e-commerce importers, who later expressed an interest in placing a substantial order, and we made sure that they had the contact information was communicated. Note that having done this once, it was pretty easy to do it again. And so we did it again just last month with some partners, the North America China Council and the Chongqing Chamber of International Commerce. But this time we did it with Seattle's larger sister city of Chongqing, which has a population of 31 million. The second trade mission, I think, was even better, and we had a few matches that we're following up on now. finally, we're gauging interest right now in sending some samples to this year's Cross-Straits Trade Fair in Fuzhou. And the Foreign Affairs Office is helping us a great deal. They've organized to have it staffed for a sampling session where our samplers will be on screen on Zoom and explaining to the folks in the room what they're sampling. So this, if we pull this off, it's going to be, I think, even more interesting. There are a lot of like secondary and tertiary impacts of our sister city program. This one here is a $176 million Marriott Tacoma downtown hotel, which is now up and running. It's 100 the backstory to this is that we had one of the vendors at our 2009 Cross-Straits Trade Fair was marketing real estate, commercial real estate. We kept in touch with him. He ultimately brought the hotelier who owns this this hotel to a nearby city, and he established a $40 million hotel, EB5 project. And we, after wooing him for seems like years about bringing this hotelier to our city, he ultimately did. He brought the hotelier to our mayor, and from there the Community Economic Development Department took over, and ultimately he found that we had built a convention center in Tacoma without the hotel attached to it. And when he found that out, he ultimately bid on a request for quotes and won, and built the hotel. And this turns out one of the investors in the EB5 project in our neighboring city was also a developer based in Wuhan. And he won a bid on a 6.6 acre center city greenfield site for a mixed use development. And it's quite a large development. Ultimately, his EB5 project ran into some trouble along when Chinese investment, the waiting list got too long, as you know, and Chinese investment ultimately went down in the US. But he had already started the project, and he sold it to an Idaho-based developer who is finishing the project now. And so they still have an interest in it. And the building number 2 is complete. It's a residential, it's right adjacent to the university, University of Washington, Tacoma. But anyways, this was another secondary impact. The World Trade Center also assisted with some marketing and some due diligence on that. And then this is a project that finally we had a celebration for the launch of in Fuzhou in 2013. And it's a very large mixed use development project. And we had some involvement with the second phase. And according to a video you'll find on YouTube, the World Trade Center was important to the success of getting the funds for the second tranche for this project. And remember, this was during the Great Recession, before domestic investment really was beginning to flow. And so now it's a local attraction, and it's been crowded on the weekends, even during the pandemic. And Jim and I had coffee there last week. In review, our early efforts in Tacoma, I think, developed a spirit of goodwill, which was developed over decades. And then thanks to the leadership of the port and the city and the Fuzhou Foreign Affairs Office, we were able to make it business for the mutual benefit of our citizens. And despite the overall tone of the relationship between the US and China, between Washington and Beijing, we have continued our support of our local businesses, and it continues to this day. And finally, what began as our Sister City project has indirectly, and with the work of many, many others at the city and elsewhere, it has ultimately led to some substantial city-changing investment projects. And that's about what I've got to say, and I'd be real happy to answer any questions that anybody has.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you very much, Mike. Wow, so many interesting things to talk about from the both of you. I know we have a number of people that are participating that have a lot of interesting experience as well that can probably comment. So please do type your questions into the Q&A panel. We do have some things happening here. Alexa Byers, who's with Business Oregon, she's been engaged in quite a lot of Oregon-China trade-related projects, and has a few things to say about that. I'm going to put her on. Alexa. Oops. Okay, Alexa, are you there? Okay, looks like I might not have done that correctly.
I'm unmuted here.
Oh, there we go. Great, great.
Excellent. And I'll put my video on. There we go. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. Super interesting, and it takes me back. I work for Business Oregon, the Economic Development Agency for the state of Oregon, and we've enjoyed some wonderful trade missions to China and have engaged in trade, especially along the lines of sustainability, waste management, air quality, trying to help China kind of clean the air and the water, and do what we can to help with equipment and air monitoring equipment and so on. We've also worked with the Softwood Export Council and bringing some wood products to the market for construction projects. So just wanted to chime in, and we look forward to further engagement with the China market. It's a very important market to the state of Oregon. So thank you for both of you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Alexa. I appreciate that. I'll make a quick comment about Little Portland Street in Suzhou. I actually have been there. Pretty interesting. When I was actually went there with a group of Master of International Management students when I was getting that degree at Portland State University. We were fortunate to, well, my colleague, or she was my partner for my exit project for Master of International Management, was the former assistant for Dr. Sun, who I believe was he was behind that project, and he had a real interest in the lifestyle in Oregon and in Portland. And I guess a main feature of that development was wood construction, which was fairly novel there at that time. So anyway, that was interesting to see. We also have another question here for Mr. Fowler. Let's see here. So have any of the higher educational institutions been involved in Fuzhou-Tacoma relationship? I understand that fewer students are choosing to study in the PRC. Michael or Mike, you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I know that we, honestly, we have had, I believe we've had like 2+2 programs in the past between University of Washington and Tacoma, and schools in China. I think it was a Shanghai school. So in other words, you could go 2 years in China and 2 years in the US and get a bachelor's degree. University of Washington Tacoma had such a relationship. I honestly don't know whether that's still available. I know that we've had multiple firms doing educational exchange type programs, and I know that very recently these are more they're more of the English language type programs. They've been hit really hard by some of the recent legislation, some of the recent laws coming out of China related to tutoring and the like. So that they've had really a tough time. But as far as educational programs between our universities, I know University of Washington Tacoma has had some. And I know that we just signed the University of Washington Tacoma Milgard School of Business just signed one with Vietnam, a memorandum of understanding. But yeah, I honestly am not aware of the status of those programs now. It's been really hard for Chinese students to get visas to come over here. I know that. And I imagine it's difficult to go the other way at this point as well with the quarantine and the like. But it's a good question. I can look into it.
Well, I appreciate the exchange. It's something I've been involved with for most of my career. And, appreciate the challenges as the nature of relationships between the countries, the US and China, evolve and change. There's a lot of beauty and challenges that come with all of that. So I appreciate the efforts, and I hope that things can continue with Sister City and educational exchange. It's pretty important to the health of general relationship. A question from a different participant, but related. Are there PRC financed retirement communities in the Pacific Northwest to attract retirees from China across the Pacific? And that's for anyone on the panel.
I believe that there are. This is something that's more not necessarily in Tacoma that I'm aware of, but I believe there are in the Bellevue area. You may be aware, just east of Seattle is Bellevue, which has a very large Chinese and Chinese American and Asian community. But I have a feeling that there are projects there, which I can look into.
Well, that's interesting. I think the PRC financed aspect of it is interesting. I know there's a number of development investments that are going on by a number of parties. But anyway, it's an interesting development as well. Go ahead.
I suspect that our hotel development projects and our mixed-use retail projects were very successful in 2013, 2014, 2015, but they began to get become problems. And yes, today I believe it is very challenging to get money out of China to these projects unless they are investment in technology companies and the like. So I think that the ease of investment has changed.
Yeah, so that EB5 activity is shifted, and you saw that with the project up in Tacoma. So yeah.
Yes, it was timing was very important. Timing was to get in early was critical, and now, as you know, EB5 program has been extended to 2027, and the initial the investment amount for targeted employment areas has gone from 500 to, I believe it's 800,000, and for non-target employment areas, it's gone to 1,050,000, I believe. But EB5 is up and running again. The Chinese wait list, I believe, is still probably pretty long, but other countries like Vietnam and the like are in play.
Okay, very good. A question for Michael Richards. Can you remind us of the issues that were associated with PDX losing its regular overseas carrier service back in 2015? And then, so follow up, how are those issues, or how are they resolved since service has been reestablished?
You know, that really was the result of the port choosing to sign a contract with the management company that managed the Terminal 6, most of the container operation, most of the operations, all the container operations. This company had issues with labor issues. Labor and the company had issues between the two of them. They were never resolved, and they resulted in the container carriers departing because of the friction between the management company and the labor union that handles most of the movement. When I came to the port just over 6 years ago, that was the big talk, was, you know, how's the labor situation? And these days, you know, labor is really an asset for the port, as is shown with the amount of cargo now that comes in. And I should add, these are Chinese cargoes for a good part. Both of the lines, I don't think I mentioned that. Both of the lines call Shanghai, one called Shanghai and Ningbo, coming into Portland by way of Busan, both MSC and SM lines. As most people may be aware, Oregon is one of the few states that has a trade surplus with China, and a lot of this is is shown there. But these situations are really in the past. The labor situations, you know, the labor is just a really motivated, you know, force, and I think that's why the carriers are coming back and why business is really booming that way.
Well, it's really great to hear, and appreciate all the work put in to get things up and running again. That's great. Any other questions around that? We did have a question, a general question. How many containers are fit on a container ship these days?
That's a funny, it's a good question. You know, some of the containers in large ports, in deep water ports, you know, Seattle, Tacoma, can be upwards of 20,000, what we call 20-foot equivalent units, right? So 20-foot containers, you measure the size of a container ship. Because of the nature of the Columbia River, up to this point, we've vessels that take maybe 4,500 to 6,000, you know, 20-foot equivalents or 20-foot containers. This was what we had seen until recently, until actually just last week. The largest ship ever to come up the Columbia River, again, an MSC vessel, had 8,200 containers on it. So that's the largest that's really come into the Columbia River. Very small by the standards of, say, you know, a Seattle, an LA, or a Long Beach. But that is the size of that.
Oh, well, that's a lot of
stuff.
A lot of stuff. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. You know, and the challenges that are, when there are challenges with that stuff, getting on shore, that creates all sorts of problems, as we've seen, and more people that are not as familiar with the ins and outs of logistics and freight started to realize that, I think, at the end of last year. From what I understood, there was a log jam that even in the you know, down in Long Beach, there were ships just idling off, you know, couldn't even dock at the port, and the wait times were pretty long. And I'm hoping
and that's still the case. It's really, as I mentioned earlier, it's about half now of what it was at its peak, which is, you know, 109 ships you can picture that, container ships. And again, many of these with those large volumes, 14,000, 20,000 containers sitting at anchor, waiting to come in, and some for weeks,
And that's
which really has made Portland very attractive.
well, and the expense that comes along with that, I think a lot of people don't understand about demurrage charges, and that every day that they're not able to dock and unload, those are costs incurred that move along somewhere, get passed on somewhere. So that's a challenge. I'm not too familiar with how that affects the port itself, but
Again, the Chinese trade is such a big part of the ocean, the shipping business into Portland. It really has been. When 242 first came into play, and we saw the tariffs on steel, that really impacted our trade with China. Things that normally would have come, wind energy components, steel for train tracks, steel for construction. That a lot of that came to a stop. It came to a halt when that first happened, and this is really started to come back again.
yeah. Another question that came in with the latest COVID Omicron lockdown in several Chinese cities. Have you seen any relief in the difficulty of booking containers as a result? And this for either of you.
No, I think the cost the cost has gone through the roof, right? The availability of containers is decreased significantly. The cost of them is increased quite a bit. So no, we're not seeing a slowdown. A lot of this supply chain was a result. There was no real one problem. There was no one issue around it. There were trucking issues. There was that huge amount of consumption when everyone was locked indoors during the pandemic. You also had China shutting down COVID. So you've got production, from our biggest supplier of consumer goods. So, you put those together and you get this perfect storm where our big producer, production partner, China, is shut down, but everyone in the United States is at home purchasing things on Amazon, just consuming. And so that's part of it. And by the time it caught up, it still hasn't caught up completely yet.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of people were reading articles in the news and reading all of these different individual factors that came together to create the storm that exists. And I'd hear comments, well, as soon as this aspect is fixed, then it'll all be fine. As soon as this aspect is fixed, it'll all be fine. And I hear what you're saying, that it's a little more complicated than that. So hopefully we can that'll work out. Mike Fowler, do you have any comments about this?
Yeah, I was going to say that it seems the one thing after another, and now we have the Ukraine war going on, which will also have an impact on logistics. I understand air parcels and the like have to fly 40% further in order to avoid Russian airspace. And so we'll experience something there. And of course, Ukraine and Russia make up 30% of the world's wheat production. And so that is going to have a huge impact on things, not even talking about oil. So there's just a lot of disruptions going on, and it's testing the flexibility of our systems.
Absolutely. Well, flexibility seems to be pretty important. It keeps it's a reoccurring theme, it seems.
I might add on that. Oregon, although we don't really have, there's no real discernible trade flowing between the Port of Portland and Ukraine. There is trade between the state of Oregon and Ukraine. Goods, and so these are non-Oregon ports and airports. But the Oregon's trade with the Ukraine is roughly $10 million per year. I mean, it breaks down to about $7 million in exports and $3 million in imports. And so there is a trade. There is some trade there, not a tremendous amount, but you'll see the impact there. The other piece, the supply chain, a lot of version of ships that would normally be plying those waters are not going through there. So you'll see a disruption there. And as Michael mentioned, the wheat, the amount of wheat that's going to really impact the wheat that's, the price of wheat that's grown here in the United States, here in Oregon as well. So
Absolutely.
we see an impact from that that we'll also feel in the shipping industry and just our economy in general.
Right. We had a live event. The Northwest Seaport Alliance and World Trade Center did a live event with Thailand a couple weeks ago, and some of the comments came out. We need feed, and you know that we export a lot of DDGs, which are the byproduct of brewing and the like, to Southeast Asia. And they can't get enough of it right now, I think, because they have also got feed from Ukraine. And so there's shortages that are going to happen. And with regard to the wheat, I know we're going to experience inflation in pricing with regard to wheat. But the big consideration is that I think there are 14 countries in Africa that spend 40% or more of their income on food. And so for us, we spend 6%, I believe. So if that cost goes up a bit, we can deal with it. But it's going to be tough on some of the developing countries.
Oh, well, yes, very difficult circumstances. Yeah, I know that Alexa had posted an article in LinkedIn today about Ukraine and the effects there. We're getting near the close to the end of our time here. So I wanted to just make sure I had a chance, first of all, to thank our panelists, but also I wanted to invite Jim Mockford, the president of the China Council, jump on and maybe say a few words before we finish.
Thank you, David. Thank you for your work as the moderator this evening. And let me thank each of our panelists here for just a minute. Michael Fowler, thank you so much for showing me around Point Ruston. The coffee shop there was great. And I encourage our members who want to have a little trip up north. It was my first road trip to Tacoma since the pandemic. And the Chinese Reconciliation Park is definitely worth a visit for everyone here listening to check out that piece of history that's very important. Not just to Tacoma, but to the entire Pacific Northwest. And also, the other things that happen in the Tacoma area, I think, are important in terms of the Historical Museum, some other activities, and sharing today with us your story of the Sister City connection and your way of doing things at the World Trade Center is definitely a resource we should know about around the Pacific Northwest. And to Michael Richards, I want to say, I'm sorry I haven't had coffee with you. The last time I saw Michael Richards in person was just before the pandemic at Lansi Chinese Garden here in Portland, when our Portland Suzhou Sister City Committee was active and able to meet in person. So hopefully, Michael, you and I can meet here locally sometime and hear about when our sister city might be able to get together again in person here in Portland. And to Michael Fowler, if you come down here to Portland, please let us know. We'll open the door of Lansu Chinese Garden or Portland Chinatown Museum to you and any other places around town you might want to visit while you're here in Portland. But I think for the Northwest China Council to be effective is to bring these voices from around the Pacific Northwest to our members. And certainly we have been able to do that thanks to both of you this evening. Particularly, I think Portlanders don't know what a boom time it has been for the Port of Portland on the waterfront. And so, Michael Richards, thank you for sharing the maritime perspective. We don't see it all here because we're a river port. When I stayed at McMinimum's Elks Temple in Tacoma, I had a view of the entire port of Tacoma right out the window. So you see all the ships in a single view pretty much when you're in Tacoma. But on the river here, it's more difficult to see just how busy our Port of Portland is. And So thank you, Michael Richards, for bringing our local story to us. You know, we get a lot of other stories about Portland, but there's some really good business stories that we need to share, not only with our own membership, but around the Northwest. And so this video will be posted by the China Council on YouTube that those of you who are listening today can share once we get the link up to other folks that you know. And I want to thank Alexa for stepping in. We want to hear more about Business Oregon going forward. And I think there's some other people in the chat line I need to talk to. And I just haven't had enough in-person cups of coffee with people here locally. So we're looking forward to doing that. And as part of my announcing the next month's activities, Northwest China Council will have our first in-person and hybrid event on April 29th. The announcement will go out soon for members. That will be a Friday afternoon movie matinee at the Pacific Northwest College of Arts with filmmaker Ron Chung, a PNCA alumni, and some of the students there as well. So when that announcement goes up, if you do want to venture out and meet with us in person, you can do so for that event. You can also join us on Zoom. And we also will have a China chat on April 21 with Professor Chao-Ning Su. The announcement about that program that will focus on Taiwan will also go out very soon. So keep an eye on our website and look at our email when John sends it out. And John, I want to thank you for being the behind the scenes person tonight as our web Zoom master, and David again for moderating the event. And I don't know if there's anything else to David I need to say, except that I want to thank everyone for attending the program this evening. And thank you again, panelists. Great job. Really enjoyed your stories.
Well, very good. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, participants. And we look forward to seeing you at the next event.